Sanderson is one of the biggest names in science fantasy writing today. His early work, especially the Mistborn trilogy, in which he invented a whole new system of magic, something he tends to do in many of his works, established his talent to such a degree he was picked to write the concluding books in Robert Jordan's mega-epic 14-book series, The Wheel of Time. In 2010, he started his own planned 10-book series with The Way of Kings, which debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestselling fiction list. And just out last month, the second book in the series, Words of Radiance. We spoke with him recently from his home in Utah. I'm going to brag one tiny little bit, and that is the person that introduced me to your work was none other than Tom Doherty.
Wow. How'd that happen?
Well, when Tor first started doing their online blog, they sent out an email for every newspaper in the U.S., and I got one. And just out of whim, I typed back, "Oh, fine, there goes the rest of my life." And I got a response from the PR people, and they said, "Hey, how would you like to do an interview with Tom Doherty?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, really." And they said, "Really?" So I ended up doing a half-page story on him, and when we were talking, before and about authors, and I was saying, Heinlein and people and that, he says, "Have you read Mistborn?" I said, "No." "Go do that right now," he said. "This guy's fantastic." So that's...
Oh, that's awesome.
I thought you'd enjoy hearing that little anecdote. So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you just finished a big book tour. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I got back mid last month. So the first few weeks after something like that are always very exhausting, but I have fully recovered at this point.
Great. Well, I had a chance to get an autograph from you at the signing in Cedar Hills for Powell's at Portland. And I want to compliment you on the fact that you hung around forever signing autographs. That's big time cool of you.
Well, you do this and you spend years wanting to break in. And I remember those days when I would go to a book signing and there would be 2 people there. And so, I want to make good on the fact that it's no longer like that, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
I want to make use of, these people support me, and I'm not so far from those days that I think I can be callous and be like, well, of course I'm going to have lots of people.
well, thank you so much for that, and it was really a treat to listen to you talk with Harriet and the other folks and share some anecdotes. Thank you very much for that one. You start out the latest Words of Radiance with the prologue that takes a different point of view of the opening event from the original book. And I'm wondering, are we going to see more of these in the future?
Yes. When I plotted the books, I planned to have the first 5 all be from different perspectives on the same day, which is one of these, fun literary things you can do in novels that I love seeing, and so I like trying out. So yes, we will be seeing 5 different perspectives on the same night, which each one should sort of expand your understanding of what happened.
I love this. Rashomon, here we come. It's going to be fun. You're going to put out a series of 10 books, and this is number 2. Do you have the final scene already?
I do, actually. I am an outliner, and there's no one right way to write a book, but I am very naturally prone to lots of outlining. Particularly, I can't start a book unless I know where I'm going, just the way I am. And so having an ending scene is very important, particularly for an individual book, but for a series as well. For me, I need to know where I'm driving. And so I do view the Stormlight Archive as 2 sets of 5, and I have I've actually written the epilogue for book 5.
Wow.
Which brings the first cycle together. And I know what the ending of book 10 is. I haven't written that yet. Perhaps I should sit down and do that. But yeah, I have a very detailed outline.
Okay, now, are we going to wait as long as we did with Robert Jordan for the conclusion, or are you just churn them puppies out?
Well, I hope you won't have to wait as long. But, I mean, I do write relatively quickly, but I also am I kind of have a bit of writing ADD, which, saying it that way makes it sound different from what it really is. What's really going on is I, as a writer, when I was early in my career, before I broke in, I fell in love with the idea of building new worlds and telling new stories. And I always wrote a new book rather than a sequel when I was trying to break in. This was partially a good business strategy. I figured if an editor liked my writing but just didn't like a particular book, I couldn't very well send them book 2 of that series and expect them to buy it. However, if they liked it but not well enough, if I was able to say, well, here's another series, what do you think of this book? It would make it that much more likely that I could break in. And so I wrote some dozen different books in different worlds when I was practicing as a writer before I broke in. And Mistborn was the first thing where I actually had to sit down and write a sequel, something I'd never really done before. And after writing the second book, I realized I, as a writer, just can't be locked into this world any longer. Otherwise, I'll start book 3 burned out. And so I had to jump and write something completely different. It's where my middle grade series came from, Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians. And it was not expected. It wasn't something I told my publisher or my agent I was doing. I just sat down and wrote something without even really the intention of publishing it. It was just so that I could refresh myself. And since then, it's become something I do very commonly. After I finish a project, I need to take time and write something very different in order to it's just how my process works, in order to refresh myself so that when I get back to the series, I'm excited about it again. And so I will be taking like 6-month breaks writing other things between books of the Stormlight Archive, and they take a year to 18 months to write. So it'll be 18 months to 2 years for each book in this series, and I can't really promise them any faster than that because otherwise I'm just going to, you don't want me as a writer burned out on the stories that I'm telling.
No.
And so yeah, it is going to take a while, and I'll be very upfront with that. Now, hopefully it won't take, the Way of Kings, between Way of Kings and Words of Radiance was 4 years, and I don't want it to ever be that long again. But I would expect 18 months to 2 years between each one. Right now I've told Tor I'm confident I can have book 3 turned in and out for March 16, 2 years from this date.
Okay, cool. And now, you've said in other interviews that your different fantasy novels like Elantris and Mistborn were born by taking a typical fantasy concept and turning it on its head, like Wheel of Time is about peasants becoming kings, Elantris is kings become peasants. What's the theme for this one?
Well, Stormlight Archive is a little bit different in that regard because when I was looking at working on the Stormlight Archive, I realized I did not want my entire career to be sort of a modernist take on the fantasy genre. Now, certainly I want that to be an aspect. Modernism in literature is this sort of self-aware literature. It's what I did with Mistborn. Mistborn is a modernist take on the epic fantasy genre. In each book, I take a major trope and I play with it. And so if you've read a lot of epic fantasy, then these things will be really fun to you. And even if you haven't, I hope that the books are very fun. But you get a little bit more out of it if you know the tropes I'm playing with. When I sat down to write The Way of Kings, I realized I didn't want this to be the only aspect of my career. Partially because, kind of in a sort of platonic way, if everything I did was only a reflection of the genre, how much new ground could I really break? And I think that reflection is very important for one who's part of the dialogue, but I also think that becoming too inhibited by it is a bad thing. And so with Way of Kings, I said, okay, instead of looking at what have other authors done and how can I spin that on its head, I want to instead say, where do I want fantasy to go? How can I break new ground? Where hasn't been explored? What would I, as a fan of the genre, want to see done? Can I create something that exemplifies the best of the genre that I've loved, but also says, well, here is the 21st century version of epic fantasy. Here's the direction that we're pushing. And that was really my goal and theme when I was working on the Stormlight Archive, was come up with the next evolution in epic fantasy as a fan. What do I love about this genre, and where should it go?
It has.
And so you're seeing play into Way of Kings a lot more of my own instincts and my own biases as a reader.
I think that you have hit the right chord for that, because the reviews, the response has been absolutely overwhelming. And everybody, this is the trope I keep running into. It's like he gets better every book. That's a tough act to follow.
That's
No.
It does put a lot of pressure on you as a writer to be like, wow, now what?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm not as worried about that. I mean, I just want to tell great stories, and I think what's happening, I'm excited by them. As long as I'm excited by them, I think we're going to be okay.
I think it resonates so much, and I've got a couple of things I wanted to mention about that hit me, and it may be totally different for other people. It's so rich that people will find zillions of things in here, but I don't know if you pronounce it, the Xanthid alongside the
Yes.
ship.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, that does just intrigue the heck out of me, and the fact that she gets a little lesson in how to manipulate a little bit, and actually does get to go over and see it and take a memory of it so she can draw it. And that, I don't know, it's something that nobody else has seen ever, and so there's breaking new ground, as it were.
Yeah, what you're really saying is, I personally feel I love the epic fantasies that come before. I'm a big fan of the genre, and when I was looking at it and saying, where do I want this to go? Where, as a fan, am I eager for fantasy to go? And my response was, I wanted to see fantasy do some of what you saw science fiction doing during the golden and silver ages. Yeah, well, really the silver ages, where it said, okay, we've told these stories. Let's really expand the types of worlds we're visiting. Let's really expand the types of things we're seeing. And that's what I really wanted to see with epic fantasy. Was I felt that we had a generation which was very Tolkien influenced, and I love those books. But I felt that the next evolution was to say, okay, let's do worlds that we haven't seen before. Let's do this. Let's try and drive fantasy to have the same world building chops that great science fiction stories do. And it's not a place that fantasy has gone as much. A lot of fantasy, and again, I'm not trying to disparage these books. These are great books, but a lot of fantasy does use our world tropes very strongly, or it uses Tolkien-esque tropes very strongly, and then uses that to play with very important and deep issues. This is part of what fantasy is great at doing.
Yeah.
But we haven't seen as much of the world building as I want to see. And I'm certainly not the only one doing it. If you've read The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin, I think it does a fantastic job of kind of breaking some new ground in some of these areas. And people have been doing some of it all along, but I've never seen a big epic fantasy series tackle it. And so that's where I wanted to go.
Wow, and did it so well. There's so many bits and pieces. There's so many layers. Maybe that's the part. It's not bits and pieces. It's layers, very organized systems. And again, you're the systems magic guy. You've got that mantle that you're going to be wearing for all of your life, I suspect. And it's a good one to have. But does that make you a systems thinker?
It does, certainly. When I was as a reader, just wanting to break in, like I said, I looked at this genre and said, where are places that innovation can happen? Where can I make my mark? And even from the get-go, I was saying, well, I don't feel that magic has been explored as well as it could be. I feel that the genre as a whole is using too many assumptions about here's how magic works. And the thing about a great setting is, and I should make this interjection.
Okay.
A great book is really about great characters. We talk a lot about setting in discussions like this because our setting, our magic, our world is what distinguishes fantasy from, a historical novel. That's the big distinction. And so we like to point out the differences. But a great novel is going to be about great characters. And I don't care how awesome your world is, if it doesn't incorporate people I care about, it's not going to be a book that I'm going to enjoy. Mm-hmm. And so you can have this awesome magic system, but it'll read like a video game if your characters aren't so engaging. You need the magic to affect people you care about for it to really work. And so I talk a lot about magic, but at the end of the day, I would much rather have great characters and a weak magic than a weak character and great magic.
Well, that's
ideally you want to do all of it.
Yeah, that's right. That's why we care so much about Kaladin in The Way of Kings. Man, it just sucks you right into that. And Jasna, and this one for me is just whoa.
Yeah, but with that stated, I feel that the setting, particularly magic, is a place that I could explore a great deal that hadn't been explored as much as I wanted to be in the genre. But also, it's, how shall we say, it's easy to make a plot that nobody's expecting. You just don't foreshadow things and you have a bad plot. But sure, no one's going to expect that, And the kind of same thing with characters. It's easy to experiment and have a very erratic character. Mm-hmm. That's not necessarily a good idea. Sometimes the plots that you're using, there are plot archetypes, and people have written a lot about this. But experimenting with plot, while fun, is also kind of different from experimenting with setting. I feel like you can do really cool and interesting things with setting without going so bizarre that you become unrelatable. And it's very hard to do that same sort of thing with plot and character. And so I find myself really excited to explore new ideas with setting and then putting these relatable, engaging characters in them and seeing what comes out of that brew.
And as part of it, as a reader, one of the real delights is watching something that was planted early come to fruition, perhaps in a way that you wouldn't have expected, but when you look back on it, it's logical, makes you change your whole assumption. That, for me, is that's the creme de la creme.
Yeah, that's what we really shoot for. When we can make that happen, those are the sorts of plots that I love. And so, yeah, that's what I'm always striving to do. You want this, the term used in screenwriting is surprising yet inevitable, which is a great term for this. At the same time, when I'm writing, what I really want is, I want a plot that has good twists and turns, but a plot that, often the ideal thing for me is if you as a reader spot it about a page before it happens. You say, oh, wait a minute, what if it's this? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would work because of this and this and this. And when I'm reading and that happens to me and I think, now I really hope it's that. Mm-hmm. And, it happens the next page. You figure it out just before it happens. That's what I love. And so that's kind of what I'm shooting for. You could guess it. You could guess it from the get-go, but the pieces all kind of align and come together right at about the time when it's happening.
Right. You start to see the pattern emerge, and there's a little self-congratulatory piece on that because you say, I spotted it.
Is.
Yeah, so that's
it is part of the fun of reading.
Oh, it is. It is. I have a couple of quick questions, and you've been very generous with your time so far. I don't want to take too much more of it, but one is an absolute geek question. On the beginning of chapter 88, you have this series of numbers that appears to be a series of dates from the diagram North Wall Code. And the only thing I would ask about it, is that something that's going to be explained later on? Is that going to be a plot piece?
You know what? This is actually a hint about a future book. And it is decipherable. Fans on my fan forum, it took them a while, but they did manage to crack the code and figure out what it said. Because the diagram is an analytical prophecy of the future. It's not a magical prophecy. Mm-hmm. It is, it owes its roots to psychohistory by Isaac Asimov. This idea that with great genius you can predict the future, at least in its general moves and flows. Mm-hmm. And so that is advice to one of the characters from himself when he was hyper intelligent.
Okay. Oh, I love that. Now I'm going to be watching for that, so it'll show up. I am sure. You were, I understand, college roommate with Jeopardy champ Ken Jennings. Is that true?
I was. Yeah.
So,
of all things, we were. I'm not sure. I was still in school. He may have graduated. I can't remember. But yeah, we were roommates. Ken and I, way back when. We have a mutual friend who's always like, all right, I've got to win the lottery or something because the two of you became famous. So I'm just waiting, when it happens to me. But yeah.
Appreciate that. And then
it was really fun when he was on Jeopardy. He wasn't allowed to tell us how long he went.
Yeah.
So we all watched his opening week. We're like, yay, Ken, and then we'd be like, all right, so how much longer do we have to keep watching this? And he just would not tell us. And it just kept going and going and going. They'd have parties at his house for watching it and things like that.
Wow. And every so often they come bring back for a challenge, something or other like that.
Yeah.
That's kind of fun. So I guess the wrap-up question is the one I always like to. Is there any question, you've been interviewed a zillion times, is there anything you've always wished that somebody had asked but they never have asked you?
That is never, I haven't had any of those. That question actually gets asked of me surprisingly often, about every third interview, and I always try to rack my brains, and so I keep getting asked that and never have anything. The only thing I would mention is, I do have a free book on my website, Warbreaker, which is epic fantasy, full novels that I just posted the entire text of in HTML or in downloadable format. So if people want to give me a try, I feel like as a reader, your time is honestly more important to you than the money that you're going to give up. And so I will give you the thing for free if you'll give me the time to give it a read, and that'll let people kind of get a feel for what I do as a writer.
Wow. And there goes my weekend right now. I appreciate that. Brandon Sanderson, one of the great authors of our time and a really nice guy to boot. Thank you so much for being with us.